The sun was setting over the quiet human colony on the distant planet of Elysia. The sky was a mix of deep orange and purple, casting a peaceful glow over the small town. People were going about their usual activities, and everything seemed normal. Children played in the fields, and adults tended to their farms or worked in the shops. It was a simple life, but one that everyone treasured. The colony had been peaceful for many years, far from the chaos and danger of the galaxy. But that peace was about to be shattered. Without warning, the sky darkened. The calm evening turned to panic as strange shadows filled the sky. The ground shook with powerful thuds, and the air was filled with a loud, terrifying roar. Huge alien ships, shaped like jagged metal claws, descended from the clouds, blocking out the setting sun. The people on the ground froze in fear. They had seen the ships before in old stories of alien invaders, but they never thought it would happen to them. Captain Lena, the leader of the colony's defense team, was one of the first to react. She had spent years preparing for this moment, but nothing could have prepared her for the sight before her. She rushed to the communications tower, ordering all nearby personnel to report to their posts. The warning sirens blared, but it was clear that the aliens had already arrived. The alien ships landed with incredible speed, sending dust and debris flying. Soldiers in advanced black armor flooded out of the ships. They were massive, towering over the humans, their eyes glowing with a cold, menacing light. These were no ordinary invaders. These were the Vraxian soldiers, feared across the galaxy for their strength and cruelty. Their leader, General Vexer, was known for his ruthless tactics, and the people of Elysia had no way to prepare for such an attack. Lena looked up as the alien soldiers began their assault, firing energy weapons that burned through buildings like they were made of paper. Screams echoed through the streets as people tried to escape. The aliens showed no mercy. They were here for one thing: control. The humans, small and fragile compared to the invaders, had little hope of standing up to the Vraxians. But it wasn't just the buildings that the aliens were after. A small group of alien soldiers moved quickly through the colony, sweeping up the children. They didn't hesitate. They didn't care about the families or the pain they caused. With terrifying efficiency, they grabbed the young ones, pulling them from their homes. Mothers screamed in desperation as their children were taken. Fathers fought back with whatever weapons they could find, but the aliens were too strong. They simply knocked the humans aside, continuing their mission with cold precision. Lena watched in horror as a group of Vraxian soldiers grabbed a young girl from her mother's arms. The girl's wide eyes locked with her mother's, filled with fear and confusion. The mother reached out, but the alien soldiers were too fast. They pulled the child away, ignoring the mother's cries. "No!" The mother screamed, falling to her knees, her hands still reaching for her child. The girl's tiny hands reached out as well, but it was no use. She was taken by the invaders. Lena felt a surge of anger rise in her chest. She had been trained for this moment, but nothing could have prepared her for the heartbreak of seeing families torn apart in front of her. These were the innocent ones, the future of the colony, and now they were in the hands of an enemy that had no care for their lives. The aliens were not just here to conquer the colony. They were taking the children. The humans knew the importance of family, how the bonds between parents and children were unbreakable. But the Vraxians, with their cold, calculating minds, saw the children as nothing more than tools. Tools to break the humans. Tools to enslave them. The children had something the adults did not: innocence and vulnerability. Something the Vraxians believed would give them the upper hand in their invasion. As the alien soldiers carried the children toward their ships, Lena's heart pounded. She couldn't let this happen, not while she still had breath in her body. She knew the mission now. It wasn't just about protecting the colony. It was about protecting the children. They were the key to humanity's survival. Without them, the colony would crumble and the human race would be lost. Lena turned to her team, her voice sharp and commanding. "We need to stop them. We cannot let them take our children." She gestured toward the town's defensive tower. "Prepare the weapons. "We're going in." The soldiers nodded, already moving into position. They knew what had to be done. It was going to be a long, hard fight, but they couldn't let the Vraxians get away with this. Not now. Not ever. But as the alien ships began to take off, carrying the children away to an unknown fate, Lena realized how desperate the situation had become. They had to move quickly. If they didn't, the humans might never see their children again. The thought of what the aliens might do to them was enough to drive her to action. Lena's mind raced as she looked up at the retreating ships. She couldn't let this be the end. Not for the children. Not for humanity. She clenched her fists, determined. The fight was just beginning. The alien ships loomed above the planet, casting long shadows over the human colony. The ground still trembled from the violent impact of the landing, and the air was thick with dust and smoke. The screams of terrified citizens echoed through the streets, blending with the sounds of chaos and destruction. The suddenness of the attack had left the humans reeling, unable to comprehend what was happening. They had always been taught to believe that they were safe, isolated in the farthest corner of the galaxy. Now, that illusion had been shattered. Inside one of the massive ships, General Vexer stood before a holographic display, analyzing the situation. His eyes glowed with a cold intensity, his mind calculating every move with ruthless precision. He was a seasoned warrior, one who had led countless conquests across the galaxy, but this mission was different. The humans were not like other species he had encountered. There was something unique about them, something that intrigued him, and he was about to exploit it. "Prepare the extraction teams," Vexer commanded, his voice deep and devoid of emotion. "We will take the children first. They will be the key to breaking their spirit." His officers nodded in unison, understanding the plan without question. The Vraxians had long studied human psychology, and they knew that the bond between parent and child was the strongest force in the universe. To take the children was to strip away the very essence of humanity's will to fight. The humans would submit, or so Vexer thought. As the extraction teams went to work, Vexer stood in the center of the war room, his mind racing. The humans had no idea what was coming. They were too focused on their immediate survival to understand the bigger picture. The children were essential, an untapped resource with the potential to crush the human resistance from the inside out. But there was more to it than that. The Vraxians had discovered something about human biology that fascinated them. The children, with their innocence and purity, carried within them a strange genetic anomaly that could give the Vraxians an edge in their war for dominance. Vexer had heard whispers of this anomaly, rumors passed down from the deepest corners of the galaxy. But it wasn't until he saw it for himself that he realized the true potential of what he was dealing with. The children were not only symbols of human vulnerability, they were a key to unlocking a new phase in the Vraxian conquest. If they could harness the power hidden within these young humans, they would have the means to break any species they encountered. But the humans were not completely unaware. As the children were taken, the resistance began to stir. Captain Lena had already been briefed on the alien attack, and though outnumbered and outgunned, she had begun organizing the defense. It was no easy task. She had no experience fighting against an enemy as advanced as the Vraxians, but she was determined. The resistance fighters were already forming in the shadows, gathering supplies and weapons, waiting for the moment when they could strike back. Lena knew the importance of the children. She had witnessed firsthand the bond between parents and their young ones, and she knew that the Vraxian strategy was not just to conquer, it was to break. If the aliens succeeded in taking the children away, the human spirit would fracture. Fear would settle in. The resistance would falter. But Lena wasn't ready to give up just yet. She gathered a small group of trusted soldiers and civilians, forming a team that would infiltrate the Vraxian shipyard and attempt to rescue the children. It was a suicide mission, but they had no other choice. Time was running out. If they didn't act quickly, the children would be gone forever. As the Vraxian ships took off, carrying the children into the unknown, Lena felt a deep sense of urgency. They couldn't wait for a full-scale counterattack. The children were already in enemy hands, and every minute that passed increased the chances of their being lost to the Vraxians forever. The plan was simple: get inside, free the children, and get out. But nothing was ever simple when dealing with an enemy as powerful and ruthless as the Vraxians. Vexor watched from his command center as the ships lifted off, his cold gaze fixed on the distant horizon. He could feel the shift in the air, the growing tension in the human resistance. He knew they would try to fight back. They always did, but the humans had no idea what they were up against. The children were the key to everything. They would break the humans, and once the humans were broken, they would be easy to control. His plan was almost complete, and victory seemed inevitable. He could almost taste it. But there was one thing he hadn't accounted for: the resilience of humanity, the strength of a parent's love, the determination of a people unwilling to give up their children. And it was that very strength that would soon ignite a spark of resistance the Vraxians could not extinguish. General Vexor turned away from the holographic display, his mind already calculating the next steps. His victory was at hand, but the humans were not as helpless as he had thought. The game was far from over. The battle for the future of this planet, and perhaps the galaxy, had only just begun. And the children, the very key to his plan, would become the focal point of a war that neither side could afford to lose. The colony, once peaceful and thriving, had been plunged into a state of chaos. Smoke billowed from the ruins of homes, and the distant cries of mothers searching for their children could be heard over the sounds of the ongoing battle. But amidst this destruction, something was happening. Something that the Vraxians had not accounted for. Captain Lena stood in the midst of the burning ruins, her heart pounding in her chest. She had watched as her people were torn apart, their families broken, their homes destroyed. She had witnessed the alien soldiers take the children, the most vulnerable, the most precious, and she could feel the weight of their loss pressing on her. But despite the overwhelming odds, something inside her refused to give up. She gathered her team in the heart of the colony, where the walls still stood, though battered and scarred. Around her, a handful of survivors, soldiers, farmers, even a few children, had begun to organize, their faces grim but resolute. They were not trained fighters, but they were willing to fight for their families, for their future. And that made them more dangerous than any alien force. Lena's mind raced as she looked at the group. They were all she had left. They were all the humans had left. The government had been decimated, the military crippled, and the Vraxians had taken their most precious resource, their children. But Lena knew one thing: the fight wasn't over. The battle for Elysia was just beginning. She cleared her throat, looking out at her team, her voice steady but filled with a fire that couldn't be ignored. "We've lost a lot," she said, her gaze sweeping across the group. "More than any of us can bear. But I refuse to let this be the end of us. We will get our children back. We will take this fight to them, and we will make them pay for what they've done." Her words were met with silence at first, but slowly the faces around her began to harden with resolve. They had no illusions about what they were up against. The Vraxians were powerful, their technology far beyond anything the humans could match. But they weren't invincible. And the humans, though outnumbered, had something the aliens couldn't understand: the will to fight for each other, the strength of unity, and the deep, unshakable love for their families. Lena turned to one of her officers, a seasoned soldier named Isaac. His face was covered in dirt, his uniform torn, but his eyes were sharp. "What do we have?" she asked, her tone urgent. Isaac glanced at the map spread across the table in front of them. "Not much, Captain. The Vraxians have secured the main landing site and are moving the children to their ships. But there's a supply depot here," he said, pointing to a small building on the map. "We could use it as a staging ground. If we can get there, we might have a chance to gather some weapons and supplies. It's risky, but it's the only shot we've got." Lena's mind spun with the possibilities. They couldn't win this fight with the resources they had. There was no denying that. But they could make the Vraxians feel the cost of their invasion. They could make their enemies pay, and if they were lucky, they might just find a way to turn the tide. "Let's move," she said, her voice steady. "No one gets left behind. We get to that depot, and we fight for every inch of ground." With that, the small resistance force set out, moving through the wreckage of their once thriving town. The streets were eerily quiet now, save for the occasional crackle of distant fires. The Vraxian presence was heavy, but the aliens hadn't yet secured every part of the colony. The humans had to move quickly before the invaders tightened their grip. As Lena led her team through the winding streets, she couldn't shake the image of the children being taken. The fear in their eyes, the terror as they were pulled away from their parents, it haunted her. She had to save them. She had to prove that humanity would not bend in the face of this invasion. The group made its way through alleys and side streets, careful to avoid the Vraxian patrols. Every step was a calculated risk. The Vraxians had technology that could track them, detect their movements, but they weren't expecting a direct assault. The humans were unpredictable, and that would work in their favor. Isaac led the group, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. He signaled for them to stop as they neared the depot. The building was heavily guarded, but there was a weakness in the perimeter, a small gap in the security field, a gap they could slip through if they were careful. Lena's heart raced as she looked at her team, all of them waiting for her command. She turned to Isaac. "We go in quiet. No noise. We don't draw attention to ourselves." Isaac nodded, and the team began to move. They crept forward, staying in the shadows, moving as one. The air was thick with tension as they approached the depot's entrance. Every step could be their last. They were in enemy territory, and one wrong move would mean their lives. Lena's thoughts were on the children. She had to get to them. She had to show the Vraxians that humanity was not as weak as they thought. They would fight for their children, and they would not stop until they had them back. Inside the depot, the Resistance found their first real victory. The Vraxians had left some of their supplies behind in the chaos of the invasion. Guns, medical equipment, and even a few of the small transport vehicles that the humans could use to move quickly. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give them a fighting chance. As they gathered the supplies, Lena's mind was already focused on the next step. She couldn't wait any longer. The time to strike back was now. The children were still in the hands of the Vraxians, and every moment they delayed was another step closer to losing them forever. "We move out now," Lena said, her voice filled with determination. "We're going to find those children." The air was thick with tension as Lena and her team prepared for what would be their most dangerous mission yet. They had gathered what little they could from the Vraxian depot. A few weapons, some medical supplies, and a couple of transport vehicles. And now, they had one goal: to infiltrate the heart of the Vraxian operation, rescue the children, and escape without being detected. It was a near impossible task, but it was the only chance they had. The small convoy of survivors moved quietly through the rubble-strewn streets, the night sky above them casting long shadows. The hum of the Vraxian ships in the distance was a constant reminder of the enemy's overwhelming presence. The plan was simple, at least on paper. Get to the extraction point, rescue the children, and get out. But Lena knew that nothing ever went according to plan when you were up against an enemy like the Vraxians. Isaac, who had become her most trusted officer, was leading the convoy, carefully navigating the broken streets. The others followed closely behind, their faces set in grim determination. There was no room for fear now. The only thing that mattered was getting the children back. "Stay alert," Lena whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Vraxians are all around us. They'll be expecting us to try something." Isaac nodded, his hand resting on the weapon at his side. He knew the stakes. They all did. As they moved deeper into enemy territory, the streets became eerily quiet. The usual sounds of life, the chatter of market vendors, the laughter of children, were replaced by an oppressive silence. It was as if the very soul of the colony had been stolen along with the children. Lena's thoughts kept drifting to the faces of the young ones, the terrified looks in their eyes as they were torn away from their families. She couldn't let that be their final memory. The team moved swiftly, ducking into alleyways and hiding in shadows whenever a Vraxian patrol passed by. The aliens had set up checkpoints all over the city, their advanced technology scanning for any signs of human movement. The humans were outmatched, but they had one thing the Vraxians didn't: the element of surprise. As they neared the outskirts of the Vraxian base, Lena signaled for the convoy to stop. They had arrived at the first major obstacle, a heavily guarded wall that surrounded the alien complex. The structure was massive, its surface smooth and metallic, reflecting the dim light of the distant fires. It looked impenetrable, but Lena wasn't one to give up easily. "Isaac," she said quietly, turning to her officer, "we need to get through this wall." Isaac surveyed the area, his eyes narrowing as he searched for a weak spot. The wall was lined with Vraxian soldiers, armed and alert. He knew they couldn't fight their way through. It was too risky. But there had to be another way in. "There's a maintenance shaft," Isaac said after a moment, pointing to a small opening near the base of the wall. "It's a tight fit, but it leads to the inner compound. It's our best shot." Lena nodded. "Let's move." The group crept toward the maintenance shaft, their hearts pounding in their chests. The opening was small, just big enough for one person to squeeze through at a time. But it was their only option. They had no choice but to take it. One by one, the team slipped through the narrow opening, emerging on the other side of the wall. The inside of the Vraxian compound was a stark contrast to the decimated colony they had just left. The walls were smooth and shiny, bathed in a cold, artificial light. The air smelled sterile, and the hum of alien machinery filled the silence. The humans moved quickly, staying in the shadows, trying to avoid detection. "We need to find the holding area," Lena whispered. "Keep your eyes open. If we get caught now, it's all over." Isaac led the way, his eyes scanning every corner. The compound was labyrinthine, a maze of corridors and rooms, each one filled with alien technology and equipment. The Vraxians were clearly well organized, their operations running like a well-oiled machine. But the humans had one advantage. They knew the colony better than the Vraxians ever could. As they crept deeper into the compound, the team encountered a few patrols, but they managed to avoid detection each time. It wasn't easy. Every footstep felt like a risk, every breath a potential giveaway. But they kept moving, determination driving them forward. They couldn't afford to fail now. Not when they were so close. Eventually, after what felt like hours, they reached a heavily guarded door. This was it, the holding area where the children were being kept. Lena's heart raced as she approached the door, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. What would they find inside? Would the children still be there, or had the Vraxians already moved them? Isaac placed his hand on the door's control panel, bypassing the alien security with ease. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a large room filled with cages. Inside those cages were the children, dozens of them, their eyes wide with fear. Some of the children were huddled together, clinging to each other for comfort, while others sat motionless, staring blankly at the cold walls around them. Lena's heart broke as she looked at them, but she didn't hesitate. "We're here to get you out," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We're taking you home." The children stared at her in confusion at first, but then they began to move, their eyes filling with hope. They had been taken from their families, torn from the safety of their homes, and now these brave humans were here to bring them back. They were the future of humanity, and they wouldn't be left behind. Lena signaled to her team, "Get them out of here. Now." The team moved quickly, unlocking the cages and ushering the children out. But just as they were about to make their escape, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway. The Vraxians were closing in. They had to move fast. Lena's pulse quickened. The mission was not over yet. They had the children, But now they had to get them out of the compound and back to safety. The countdown had begun. There was no turning back. The escape from the Vraxian compound had gone smoother than Lena dared to hope, but the closer they got to the exit, the heavier the sense of danger grew. Every corner felt like a trap, every shadow a hiding spot for an enemy soldier. The children, wide-eyed and scared, clung to the resistance fighters who had freed them. But their terror wasn't just from the Vraxians, it was from the unknown. Would they make it out alive? Would they ever see their families again? Lena kept her pace steady, every step calculated, every movement purposeful. They couldn't afford to be reckless, but the urgency in her chest was pushing her forward faster than she should have gone. Every minute they wasted brought the Vraxians closer to realizing their plan had been compromised. Every minute that passed, they risked losing their only chance at freedom. As they moved through the corridors of the Vraxian facility, Lena couldn't shake the thought of the families left behind. She had promised herself that this was just the beginning. If they made it out alive, they would return, they would strike back, and they would take their planet back from the invaders. Isaac, walking alongside Lena, kept a close eye on their surroundings. His hand hovered near his weapon, ready for any threat that might emerge from the shadows. The last thing they needed was a confrontation now, not when they were so close to the exit. "We're almost there," Isaac muttered, his voice barely audible. "Just a little further." But Lena could see the unease in his eyes. He knew, just like she did, that there was no such thing as a safe distance yet. The Vraxians could show up at any moment, and if they did, they would have to fight their way out, with the children in tow. The thought made her stomach tighten. If the Vraxians had any idea what they were planning, they would retaliate with everything they had. And in their current state, with only a handful of humans and a small cache of weapons, they were underprepared for such a battle. As they approached the entrance, a sudden loud crack echoed through the facility. Lena froze, her heart skipping a beat. It was the unmistakable sound of an explosion. Her mind raced. Had the Vraxians discovered their presence? Had someone triggered a trap? "Move," Lena barked, adrenaline flooding her body. She didn't need to tell them twice. The group surged forward, pushing the children ahead of them as they ran down the hall. The sound of footsteps grew louder behind them, and Lena's fear shifted to raw determination. They had no time to waste. If the Vraxians were close, they had to beat them to the exit, or they would be trapped inside. The corridor ahead began to twist and turn. They had reached the heart of the facility, and if they kept moving forward, they'd find the exit. But as they turned a corner, a barrage of energy blasts exploded against the walls ahead of them. The hallway was blocked. A team of Vraxian soldiers stood between them and their freedom, their weapons drawn, their eyes glowing with the cold certainty of death. Lena skidded to a halt, her heart racing. She didn't have a clear shot, not with the children behind her. The Vraxians were waiting for them, their weapons charged, their faces unreadable beneath their armor. Every instinct in her body screamed for a retreat, but there was nowhere to go. They had been backed into a corner. "Get the children to cover," Lena shouted, her voice sharp with command. Isaac quickly herded the children behind the nearest piece of cover, an overturned piece of machinery that would provide some protection, at least for the moment. Lena's mind raced, weighing the options. She could try to negotiate, maybe buy time, but she knew the Vraxians would never let them go so easily. The only thing left to do was fight. Lena pulled her weapon from its holster, her fingers curling around the cold, heavy grip. The team had a few guns, and Isaac had already set up a makeshift barricade. But they were outnumbered. And the Vraxians had superior weapons. She wasn't sure they could survive a direct confrontation. "We don't have time to waste," Isaac said, his voice grim as he peered around the corner. "We need to move. Now." Lena nodded, her mind already calculating their escape route. The only way out was through. They couldn't afford to wait for backup or hope that the Vraxians would show mercy. They had to act now. With a sharp nod, Lena signaled for the team to prepare. They would have to fight their way through. The children's safety depended on it. As the Vraxian soldiers advanced, Lena's mind cleared. She was ready. She had trained for moments like this, and though the odds were stacked against them, there was no turning back. Her soldiers fired first, their shots echoing through the hallway. Energy blasts ricocheted off the walls, filling the corridor with blinding light. The Vraxians returned fire, their weapons more advanced, but Lena's team was quick, ducking behind cover and returning fire. The exchange was chaotic, with blinding flashes of light and the sharp sound of weapons discharging. Lena's thoughts were sharp, precise. Every move counted. She watched as one of her soldiers, a young man named Mark, peeked around cover and took down a Vraxian soldier. But the alien force wasn't backing down. They were relentless. The moment stretched on, the tension unbearable, but then Lena saw it, an opening. The Vraxians had shifted their position slightly, giving her just enough space to maneuver. With a quick command, she led the charge, directing her team to break through the line of fire. "Go! Go, go!" Lena yelled. They dashed forward, narrowly dodging the barrage of incoming fire, and in one swift movement, they broke through the enemy line. The children were running behind them, their feet pounding the floor as they followed their protectors through the chaos. But they weren't out of danger yet. The Vraxians were still coming, their relentless pursuit inescapable. The exit was within sight, but the countdown was on. Every second brought them closer to either victory or total defeat. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as they neared the final stretch of the compound. They were almost there. They had to be. "Hold on," Lena urged, pushing forward with everything she had. Almost out. The last stretch was open, the final obstacle in sight, the doors that led to the outside world. But as Lena ran toward them, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being hunted. The Vraxians weren't done with them yet. They were coming. The heavy doors of the Vraxian facility loomed before them like a final barrier between life and death. Lena's heart hammered in her chest as she sprinted toward them, the echoes of enemy footsteps pounding louder behind them. The children, running as fast as their small legs could carry them, stayed close, huddling together in the middle of the resistance fighters. They had made it this far, but the end of their journey was still shrouded in uncertainty. The Vraxians were not far behind. The doors slid open with an eerie hiss, revealing the moonlit landscape outside. The night sky was strangely calm, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded inside the compound. For a moment, it seemed like they had escaped, like the madness of the battle and the uncertainty of their future could be forgotten. But Lena didn't have time to savor the sight. She knew the Vraxians wouldn't give up so easily. "Move, move!" Lena barked, her voice cutting through the tension. She pushed the children ahead of her, making sure they were the first to cross the threshold. The rest of the team followed close behind, weapons raised and eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. But there was no time to savor their small victory. The Vraxians were already in the process of mobilizing, and their ships, high above the colony, were descending with terrifying speed. Lena's instincts flared. She couldn't let them get away, not when they were so close to a true escape. She needed to get them to the extraction point. It was their only chance. As they ran across the open ground, the distant rumble of Vraxian ships grew louder, their engines vibrating through the earth beneath them. The group moved quickly, darting between patches of debris and the remnants of old buildings that had once made up the colony. It wasn't much cover, but it would have to do. Isaac, who had remained close to Lena throughout the entire ordeal, was already scanning the area for any potential threats. His eyes darted from the Vraxian ships overhead to the horizon, where he knew their extraction point awaited. The distance was long, too long to remain unnoticed for much longer. "They're coming," Isaac said, his voice low and tense. "We need to keep moving. If we stop now, we're sitting ducks." Lena nodded, keeping her pace steady. The kids were frightened, but they were resilient. They had already been through so much. The trauma of being taken from their homes, the fear of being separated from their families. It would take a long time to heal. But right now, all that mattered was getting them out alive. Ahead, the flickering lights of the extraction point came into view. A small, makeshift camp set up outside the perimeter of the destroyed colony. The team had arranged for transport there, a series of cloaked ships that would be their ticket off the planet. But it wasn't just a landing zone. It was also their last line of defense. They had to make it there first. Lena pushed herself harder, forcing her legs to move faster. Every step was a battle, but she couldn't slow down. She wouldn't. Just as they neared the extraction site, a series of explosions ripped through the air. The ground shook beneath their feet, and the sky above lit up with the deadly streaks of Vraxian energy blasts. The first ship fell, the massive craft crashing to the ground in a blaze of fiery wreckage. They were under attack. "Get to cover," Lena shouted, diving behind a large pile of debris just as another explosion rocked the ground. The group scrambled to find shelter, the children huddling close to the adults for protection. Isaac looked at Lena, his face tight with worry. "We're not going to make it there on foot, not with them on our tail." Lena's mind raced. She knew Isaac was right. They wouldn't be able to outrun the Vraxians on foot, not with their ships hovering overhead. They needed a way to fight back, to level the playing field, even if only for a moment. It was a long shot, but it was their only option. "We got to sabotage their ships," Lena said, her voice filled with determination. "If we can take out their air support, we stand a chance." Isaac stared at her for a moment, as if weighing the risk. "It's a suicide mission," he said, but there was no fear in his voice, only cold, calculated resolve. He knew as well as she did that this was their last chance. Lena nodded. "It's not a choice anymore. It's the only way." They quickly made their way toward the wreckage of the nearest ship, where a group of Vraxian soldiers were trying to regroup. The fighters moved quickly, their weapons raised, ready to make a stand. It wasn't much of a fight. They were outnumbered and outgunned. But the resistance had one thing the Vraxians didn't: the element of surprise. Isaac was the first to move, taking down a soldier with a precise shot. Lena followed immediately, her heart racing as she focused on the ship's engines. They needed to disable it quickly before the other ships could arrive. Time was running out. The resistance fighters began to engage the remaining Vraxians, their energy weapons lighting up the night as they fought for survival. Lena and Isaac made their way to the back of the ship, where they could see the weak points in its structure. With a series of well-placed charges, they began to set up explosives around the engines. If they could take out the propulsion system, they'd at least slow down the other ships. "Get ready," Lena shouted, her hand on the detonator. "We don't have long." The sound of gunfire and explosions filled the air, but Lena's focus was solely on the task at hand. She counted down in her head. 3, 2, 1. The explosion rang out like thunder. The ship's engines erupted in a shower of sparks and debris, sending a shockwave through the area. The Vraxian soldiers, momentarily disoriented, scrambled to regroup, but it was too late. The ship was crippled, and the remaining Vraxians had lost their advantage. Isaac quickly turned to Lena. "We've got to move now." Lena nodded, grabbing the detonator and tossing it aside as they sprinted toward the extraction point. The explosion had given them a brief window of opportunity, but they still weren't safe. The Vraxians would retaliate, and they had to be ready for the final push. With the children close behind them, and the rest of the resistance fighters following in their wake, they pushed forward. The final stretch was in sight, and this time Lena refused to stop. Not until every last one of them was safe. The extraction point was closer now, but the night felt as if it were stretching out endlessly before them. Lena's legs burned from the effort, but she pushed forward, ignoring the fatigue. The sound of distant gunfire and explosions reverberated through the air, a constant reminder that they were still being hunted. The Vraxians weren't far behind, But Lena's focus was unwavering. Every step they took brought them closer to safety, but they weren't there yet. Isaac kept pace beside her, his eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of the enemy. The makeshift camp ahead, where the transport ships waited, was within sight, but the path to it was still perilous. It was a wide-open area, and the risk of a Vraxian ambush was high. If they didn't make it there before the Vraxians reorganized, they would be sitting ducks. "Keep moving," Isaac called out, urging the team forward. "We're almost there." Lena nodded, her heart pounding. They had been through so much already. They had fought tooth and nail to get this far, and she wasn't about to let the Vraxians win now. She stole a glance behind her, seeing the children still clinging to their protectors, eyes wide and full of fear. It tore at her heart to see them in this state, but there was no time for comforting words now. Their safety was all that mattered. The extraction point was just beyond the next rise, but the moment they crested the hill, Lena's blood ran cold. A dozen Vraxian soldiers stood between them and the ships. Their weapons were raised, and they were waiting. They had anticipated their move. Lena's mind raced as she quickly scanned the battlefield. There was no cover, no place to hide. The only thing they had left was the element of surprise, and even that was rapidly slipping away. She was about to order a retreat when she saw something in the distance, a shimmer, a shape. Another Vraxian ship coming in for a landing. They were about to be completely surrounded. "Spread out," Lena yelled, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Head for the ships." The team responded immediately, running in different directions to confuse the enemy. It was a risky move, but they had no other choice. The Vraxians were closing in from all sides. Lena's pulse hammered in her ears as she sprinted toward the nearest ship. She could hear the Vraxian soldiers shouting, rallying together to cut off their escape. Her breath came in ragged gasps, but she didn't dare stop. Isaac was close behind, covering her back with his weapon raised, firing at the Vraxians in their path. Ahead, the first transport ship's door opened with a loud hiss. The extraction crew, a group of human soldiers who had been waiting for this moment, waved them forward, urging them to hurry. But the Vraxians weren't giving up without a fight. A blast of energy shot across the ground, striking one of the transport vehicles, and it exploded in a burst of flames. The enemy was getting closer. Lena's heart skipped a beat. One of the ships was gone. The remaining transports were now their only hope. "Go! Go!" Lena screamed, her voice almost frantic. The group was close, but the Vraxians were nearly upon them. She could feel the ground tremble beneath her feet as a Vraxian warship hovered low overhead, its guns targeting them. Isaac, ever calm in the face of danger, took a sharp breath. "Lena, we need to disable that ship. It'll be over for us if we don't." Without hesitation, Lena nodded. She had no time to think about the consequences. They had to act now, or they'd lose everything. "Cover me," she shouted, running toward the downed ship. Isaac and the rest of the team moved into position, firing at the Vraxians to keep them at bay. The children were safely tucked into the transport, but there was still one major threat. If that warship made it through, they would be sitting ducks. Lena moved quickly, her boots pounding on the cracked ground as she reached the wreckage of the ship. The Vraxians were closing in, but she spotted what she needed. An energy cell, just the right one to take out the ship's shields. It was risky, but it was the only shot they had left. She pulled the device from her belt and started working quickly, her hands shaking from the pressure. Every second counted. Behind her, the gunfire was intense. Isaac and the team were keeping the enemy occupied, but she knew it wouldn't last long. A loud explosion rattled the ground, sending dust and debris flying into the air. A blast of energy narrowly missed her, and she ducked instinctively, her heart pounding. But there was no time to lose. The ship was still a few feet away, and the Vraxians were closing in. With a final click, the device locked into place, and Lena felt a brief surge of hope. She turned, just in time to see the ship's shields flicker and collapse. It was down. Now. Lena yelled, her voice full of urgency. She sprinted toward the transport, the remaining fighters already moving toward her. The last of the children had made it inside, and the door was closing, but the Vraxians were close, too close. Isaac shouted a warning, and in that moment, Lena understood. There was one last fight left. Everyone get in. Lena shouted as loud as she could, her breath ragged. The ship's door started to close, but a few Vraxians had managed to get too close. The exchange of fire turned into a blur of action, as Lena and the others did everything they could to hold off the enemy, just long enough for the final few to make it inside. The warship loomed overhead, ready to strike, but Isaac fired one final shot at its engines. The ship staggered for a moment before veering to the side, unable to continue its pursuit. The transport ship's engines roared to life, and with a sudden burst of speed, they lifted off the ground. The ground below them seemed to fall away, the once troubled colony becoming smaller and smaller. The stars above seemed a little brighter, but the battle wasn't over yet. Lena took a deep breath as she watched the alien world grow distant. They had made it out, barely. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. They had won a battle, but the future of humanity was still uncertain. As the ship ascended into the safety of space, Lena finally allowed herself a moment of relief. The children were safe, her team was alive. And they had one more thing now: hope. They weren't done yet. The fight had only just begun.